Okay, so we wanted to launch the BTEC Cafe with a real discussion on topical issues faced by BTEC teachers. Many of these have been raised through our ever-growing, and I must say, fabulous Facebook group. What a superb support network it has become. So tonight, I'm thrilled to introduce Colin Leith, Business Subject Lead from Pearson, has kindly agreed to join our discussion and will hopefully be able to provide additional guidance and answer some of the questions we have. So hello Colin, and a really warm welcome from myself, John, and all the BTEC teachers here in our cafe this evening.
Right, good evening, yes, and thank you for inviting me. You've sold me as the subject lead. I'm afraid that's not what I do. I've not worked on the development or the assessment of this. I'm just a point of contact within Edexcel, and my job title is subject advisor, but yeah, you mustn't call me subject lead. I'm sure that would upset people within Edexcel.
Okay, Colin, well, you're very welcome as the subject advisor. Thank you for joining us.
Okay.
Okay, so as I say, my name is Michelle Stevenson, and my colleague John Clark is here to field any questions that you may have. Questions can be asked.
Everybody.
Yeah, thanks, John. Questions can be asked by our chat facility at the bottom right-hand side of your screen. So we've identified a number of different themes, really, that have been raised through the Facebook group. You can see here what's on our menu. Undoubtedly a tasty selection, and I really do promise that that is the end of my cafe puns, or should I say buns there. So folks, we planned for the webinar to last, thanks for that one laugh, great. So we planned for the webinar to last about 45 minutes, and we do have to keep the time because our economics colleagues are standing in the wings ready to do their webinar straight after us. So we do apologise in advance if we are not able to get to your questions. Okay, so making a start, and here you are in the hot seat, Colin. Very quick question for you here. Can you give me 3 reasons why a centre should choose BTEC?
Okay, I had to think about this, and I came up with 3. The first is that BTEC qualifications can be delivered using local contexts, and I think that's quite important, not only for the interest of the students, but also the delivery can be tailored to meet the staffing expertise, local timetabling requirements. So the local context would be the first. The second is that BTECs generally offer a variety of assessment methods. So it's not just exam. For the current BTEC Nationals, there's exam, task, and the internally assessed unit. So variety of assessment methods. And I think the third reason is that it provides a recognised progression route for students. I think the BTEC brand is quite well recognised by employers and universities, so students can be assured that the qualification they end up with has got recognition both in HE and in the employment market.
Okay, thank you for that, Colin. Okay, Colin, so I'm going to put you in a number of different situations. So as teachers of BTEC, we're not only involved in, obviously, the design and the delivery of the courses, but quite a significant part is the marketing. So here's your situation. You've got Year 9 Options Day, attended by those Year 9 students and their parents. And then you've also got to go to a feeder school to promote BTEC. What would you say are the absolute key essentials to marketing your BTEC programme and that could really make it stand out in front of the crowd? The third part of my question there, Colin, is does Pearson offer any supporting marketing materials that teachers can access?
Yes, I mean the last point first, the materials. We've got an options evening page on the website where teachers can download posters and postcards and guides for students and guides for parents. So they're generic materials. There are some subject-specific ones as well, but the guide to parents is perhaps quite important because one of the things that BTEC teachers sometimes battle against is the perception among some parents at least that a BTEC doesn't have the same kudos as GCSE or for level 3 as an A level. So the options materials, the options evening website page. In terms of the message, I think both the students and the parents need to understand that a BTEC qualification is not only recognised but can provide their youngsters or the youngster, him or herself, with progression to the next level. So if it's year 9, doing a BTEC qualification will help the students onto a level 3 course of some sort. I mean, if it was a year 11, the level 3 course could help with progression onto university or to employment. So the progression message, I think, is important.
Yeah.
The other thing to make it stand out, and this might be attractive to some year 9 students, is that the way of working and the way of assessing is different from other qualifications, and it might be different from the way of working that they've been used to in their first 3 years of secondary school.
Okay, thank you for that. So a slightly different situation here, which teachers face, because I do believe that there is that element in some schools and colleges of BTEC being the poor relative, and the perception that it lacks value compared to perhaps sort of the GCSE and the A level. So if you're a teacher going to sort of SMT to discuss offering BTEC as an alternative to GCSE, or perhaps as a complementary course to A level, what key arguments would you present, and is there any data there to support your discussion, such as sort of national achievement rate and perhaps progression of students going to university that teachers can access?
Yes, I found some data from our business manager, which was looking at the situation since 2008 and how things seem to be changing in terms of recognition. In 2008, only 13% of students going to university went with a BTEC. Now, between 2008 and 2016, that's changed, and it's now over 24% of students going to university with a BTEC. So it's gone up from 13 to over 24% in the last 7 to 8 years. Now, that seems to suggest that there's an increasing recognition amongst heads of sixth form, amongst parents, that a BTEC route is a good progression route to university. It's not necessarily all people doing an extended diploma. I think the fastest growing area is a mix of BTEC with A level. So a student might typically do a diploma alongside one A level, or do a subsidiary diploma alongside 2 A levels, and that's actually growing faster than students doing the extended diploma, doing a whole BTEC program.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so let's take it a stage further now. As teachers, we're often required to do that taster session. Can you give any examples or suggestions of what as teachers could do to attract the able students to consider BTEC as an alternative to GCSE?
I think taster sessions, by their nature, tend to be sort of selling sessions, trying to get the students interested. I mean, I've not been teaching now for the last 7 years, so this might seem a bit out of date, but I remember using a variety of taster sessions, and one that seemed to work well was a basic simple value-added lesson where I'd buy some chocolate buttons, and the students had to find a way of packaging them and branding them to be able to sell them for more than a few pence. And it involved the students working together, it involved the students discussing things, making decisions, and eventually presenting. So I'm not really sure if it matters what the students do, as long as they're doing something together, making decisions and presenting, so that they get a feel for the active nature of the subject.
Okay, thank you. Excellent. Do we have any of our people here in the cafe who can just offer perhaps a suggestion that they use? What's your favourite? If you could just note down in our chat window, what's your most successful taster session activity that you do? You can just note it down now in the chat window and can perhaps share some of the ideas there. Any thoughts there, folks?
Early questions in the chat room before you ask that question, Michelle, relating to the availability of more teaching resources. Colin, do you know if Pearson have got any more plans for that?
I mean, the publishers are publishing like revision workbooks, which are due out, I think, in March. So they're producing some Unit 2 and Unit 3 material. In terms of free resources on the website, we still haven't got AABs for every unit. I mean, we're nearly there. I think it's some of the units in the 20s haven't got them yet, but we've got AABs for most of the units now. We're still waiting for some sort of sample work for Unit 2, but we've got some for Unit 3 now.
Thanks for that. Another early theme is the lack of recognition of BTECs in terms of being aimed perhaps at less able students, or not having parity with GCSEs and A levels. And I'm guessing that's a constant battle you've been fighting there, Colin.
It is, yes, and I think all vocational teachers have to address that at some point, that they will encounter prejudice, perceptions from parents especially, about what their youngsters would do or how their youngsters would progress with a vocational qualification. Gradually, I think perceptions are changing, but I mean, there clearly is. I mean, it's part of our culture in the UK, or in England anyway. It's part of our culture to maybe see academic qualifications as more rigorous. I mean, I have to say it's very unfair, because a BTEC student has to achieve A level much earlier in the course than an A level student does, especially with a linear A level. The sort of level that an A-level student has to reach at the end of year 13, a BTEC student has to be hitting much earlier in their internal assessment. So, I mean, I think it's a very unfair perception.
Yeah. Thanks for that, and a few suggestions coming in there for sample sessions. So we'll move on from there then, Michelle?
Yeah, I know. I've noticed we've got quite a few questions coming through here, Colin, on Unit 2, and we're going to look at that in a little while. So please hold on to those questions, folks, and hopefully Colin will be able to answer those for us, and perhaps make the mystery of Unit 2 a little clearer.
Am I supposed to be able to see the questions? Because at the moment I can't see them.
You've got a chat facility there, Colin. The little, what looks like a speech bubble icon on the right-hand side of your screen. If you press on that.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Right. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So, Colin, what support does Pearson offer to help teachers understand if they're assessing at the right level? And this is particularly an issue for teachers who are doing the new specifications. So, the internally assessed units. There is there anything out there that's available for teachers to look at in terms of sample material?
The support is starts really with the OSCE materials, which, if you've been teaching BTEC for some time, you'll be well used to. Essentially, the process starts in September, when the lead internal verifier is expected to download the standardisation materials. There's no longer a test, but the standardisation materials to be used with the team in school or college. And ideally that should start in September, and that involves looking at assignment briefs and student work. So that's the first point. After that, through the year, the support, the way the BTEC quality assurance works is internal, where through the internal verification process, people are checking, getting a second opinion, a second pair of eyes, looking at work. So you've got that level of support, and then once the standards verifier is allocated, you've got someone you can ask there. After Christmas, we're changing that, or we're hoping to change that, to allow standards verifiers to stay with the centre for more than 1 year, so that the relationship wouldn't end in July and then pick up in January with someone new. So we're hoping to, if standards verifiers stay with us, we're hoping to extend the relationship that people might have with their standards verifier for 2 or 3 years. Other support, ideally you've got the sample learner work. We've got some for Unit 1 for the 3 assignments, and gradually, as the course builds up, we'll get sample learner work for other units as well. And then, of course, next September the OSCE materials will be for a different unit. This September they were for Unit 4, so next September there'll be a different unit, and gradually, as a qualification gets older, there are more and more bits of work that can be used for standardisation.
Okay, we're getting a few questions here, Colin, on this. And and there seems to be, for sort of certain units, there may be only a pass example. I think what, and I think we talked about this earlier, what teachers really value is a clear example for each unit of the pass, merit and distinction, i.e. what is the target, what is the gold star of the assessment that students are required to get. I think we've got quite a few teachers here. For example, Rebecca's just said Unit 1 sample work needs to cover pass, merit and distinction. We need to see that learner work where all that is covered. So
I can see. Yeah, I can see that Justine has made the point, and Louise. Yes, it takes time to get this. We did it for level 2, but it didn't come in the first year. I mean, the practical problem we have is that until students have taken these units, the work doesn't exist. So we managed to get some students last year to do Unit 1, but they weren't students who were on this course. The work was adapted from other students, and it's not ideal, but it will take time, because unlike with an A-level, the work actually never comes to the headquarters here in London. The work is always in centres or moving between SVs and schools, so it takes time for us to gather this sample work. So yes, I mean, I understand it's very frustrating, but we won't have any more this year on that.
Okay.
An interesting point, I think, coming there again through the chat window about SVs is, are they likely, do you think, Colin, to be sympathetic in the initial visits based upon lack of standardised materials for teachers to use?
I'm not sure what you mean by sympathetic. I mean, the SV just has to make sure that the standard is being met. Lack of standardisation. I mean, we've got the OSCE materials, which provides examples from one unit. It would be impossible to provide standardisation materials for every unit. That's why every year an extra unit is added. But the standardisation materials that we provide in OSCE are supposed to help teachers understand the standard that they're going for and the process that they have to apply when making assessment decisions.
And are there sort of those examples of that each level for pass, merit and distinction? I think. No, I
mean that's the point other people are making. Yes, I see, Ellen, you're frustrated by this as well. When you say no one knows what the standard is, I mean, the standard is something that you can get from the standardisation material. Even if it's not the unit you're teaching, you should be able to see how the standard has been applied in that standardisation material, and I mean, draw inferences from that. BTEC courses have never had sample work for every unit. It's always been done on this OSCE materials.
Okay, all right. Okay, thank you for that. So another question in terms of feedback, really. A few years ago, the general way of providing feedback to students, and certainly the formative feedback, was to identify where they had achieved the P1, M1 and D1 throughout their work. However, we moved away from this. So what format of interim feedback would Pearson recommend teachers use to support their students whilst they're completing the assessments, if any?
Well, the answer is none. Since the September 2014 internal assessment rules, there's no interim feedback. The formative feedback needs to be done before the assessment starts. So during a dummy run, for example, while you're doing the teaching and learning, giving students lots of feedback there. But during the actual assessment, there's no interim feedback allowed.
Okay, all right. Thank you for clarifying that.
Judith has asked, where do we find the OSCE materials? The OSCE materials I was referring to are accessed through Edexcel Online, and it's your lead internal verifier. Once that person has registered, they then get access to the standardisation materials. So you need to ask Judith, you need to ask your lead internal verifier.
Okay, and Abby, you've just mentioned there about the units. Level 3, Unit 2. We are on our way. We will get there. That's on our agenda just a little bit later on. Okay, so now, Colin, we're looking at sort of research and referencing, and this does tie into Unit 2. So my first question is, What would Pearson recommend in terms of positioning of references within written assessed work? Is it within the assessment or at the end, or if at all?
What I'd use for that, I mean, we produced some free resources on this. It's the Skills for Learning resource number 7 that's on the website, which is called Citing and Referencing to Avoid Plagiarism. That's a sort of 7-page document for students and teachers to work through, so I would use that. And on research, the document number 6, so the Skills for Learning number 6 on researching and noting information, that too would be very useful for Unit 2. So in the Skills for Learning materials, numbers 6 and 7 are especially sort of geared towards this. So if you haven't come across them on the website, you need to look under Course Materials and then choose the Teaching and Learning Materials tab, and at the bottom it just said Skills for Learning and Work, and there are 15 different files there, and it's file number 6 and file number 7 that you want.
Fantastic. I think, Colin, if you could sort of send me the link to that, and then I'll post it on our Facebook group if people can't find it, so just an additional support there. So it'd be great.
Okay, yes, yeah.
Thank you. Okay, now moving towards the Unit 2 here. So for Unit 2, obviously we're all aware, and this is for the Level 3, that students are required to carry out some research during a research window. In terms of that, what advice would you offer students for making the best use of their research? So how should they signpost it and reference it? And there's the 2 areas there in terms of sort of the rationale and also within the marketing plan as well.
Yeah, I wouldn't get too hung up about this. I mean, in the research criterion, if you've looked at the mark bands, there isn't any specific level descriptor that is there to reward referencing the sources. So I think what you need to do there is just use the research that you've done to support recommendations you're making in your rationale, but don't worry too much about sort of the formal referencing systems, because the level descriptors don't mention that at all. So showing that you've used it, but without wondering too much about you know, the formal referencing that you might expect in an internally assessed unit.
But good point there from Deborah and Joe. Don't they need to discuss sort of the reliability and validity, and then that's sort of actually in the grading, the marking mark scheme?
Yes, they do. Yeah. So for the research criteria, the 12 mark one, at the top of the mark band, you've got the reference to the quality of the research, that students should be discussing the quality of it, and clearly when it says sustained references will be made to the case study and independent research, I think is the phrase used. So what the students have to do is they've got to show that they've used the research that they've carried out to provide their plan. They've got to justify why they've used it. But I mean, as I said before, there are no specific marks for correct referencing. Okay,
so it would be sufficient for a student to say, say for example, the research theme was on biscuits and the biscuit market. So it could say sort of the business is targeting a growing market. An article in the Guardian suggested that that would be sufficient, would it? You know,
yes. So if they've accessed any reports, that's what they can use the 6 pages of notes that can be used to take into the Unit 2, so that it's not a memory test. That would be something that you could write down so that you can then make a reference to it.
So do the, on the sort of the research notes there, do the students need to attach those notes to their sort of task book? Does that,
no. No, the teacher has to keep those secure in case they're called for by the examiner, but no, they don't get sent with the work, no.
Okay. There seems to be quite a theme here in terms of people just want a little bit more clarification, if you can, Colin, in terms of how do students write a paragraph then in terms of talking about the validity and reliability of the research that they've done?
Well, they could I mean, one way would be to comment on any potential errors or potential bias in the research that might have an impact on the rationale, so that they can show that they're aware that the research they've done might lead to conclusions that didn't quite work out, so that they're understanding the limitations in that sense. So potential bias would be a way of showing that.
Okay, okay. And I guess if they say something in terms of, you know, when we carried out the research, it was essential to look at whether the research was up to date and relevant, and which sort of geographical area it was discussing, so sort of the specifics that way.
Yes, I mean.
Yeah. Okay. So a little question now. I just need to move on in terms of time, because I'm conscious of the economists there. I think we could go on all night about Unit 2, but I do need to move on there. So I'm just going to just a quick question, really, Colin. Because there's quite a few people I suspect who are thinking about moving over to teach the new spec there. What externally assessed units would you suggest they do in that year 1?
Well, it depends on what size you're doing. If you're doing the 360 size, the extended certificate, then just do Unit 2, Units 1 and 2, but Unit 2 for the external in the first year. If you're doing the 720, the diploma, or the 1080 size, the extended diploma, then do Units 2 and 3 in the first year.
Okay, all right, thank you for that. Okay, so let's really get into the nitty-gritty of Unit 2. So very quickly, Colin, actually I think we'll move on from that one. We were talking about introductory lesson for developing a marketing campaign, but I want to get over to some of the further questions. So similarly, teachers have started delivering this, and the general thoughts have been that they have been going through each learning outcome and delivering the content that is there. Now, one of the issues that was raised, that actually there's a little bit of repetition between the different learning outcomes. So how would you recommend, is there an approach that Pearson would recommend in terms of the best way of delivering this? Is it sort of starting with the assessment, is it delivering through context and then perhaps drawing the theory out there? Is there a sort of a guideline there, any guidance that you can offer?
I think probably the most important thing is to deliver Unit 2 through different scenarios, and make sure that you develop the research skills in the students, so different scenarios that allow the students to do some research as well, so that you're delivering the learning aim B, if you like. When you're teaching the students about the market research methods, you're then linking that with some research the students are doing themselves, maybe using ice cream or pizzas, or coming up with different scenarios that you can give the students. So I think that's probably the best way to develop the skills in the students.
Okay, thank you. So let's imagine the research window is now open. So first of all, do Pearson offer any guidance and support for students to complete the research task?
No, I mean, nor should the teacher. Once the Part A has been issued, I mean, it says it in the introduction to the Part A in the SAM that the students have to work independently. So there's no extra guidance other than what is in Part A.
Okay, okay. So there's a question there from Andrea. Will primary research be expected, or is it simply sufficient to use sort of secondary research?
Depends what type of primary research. I mean, in terms of customer questionnaires, I mean, they're probably of little use. I mean, it depends on the business in the pre-release, but if it was, for example, ice cream, as it was in the SAM, and the student was to visit an ice cream business, or visit perhaps farm shops, or where the product is sold, that sort of research may be quite useful. But customer questionnaire type primary research I wouldn't have thought would be that useful.
Okay, okay. So just picking up on a couple of questions, well, a sort of similar question really from Joe and Deborah here. So the students have got their research, it's there on those 6 pages. As part of that research, can they also bring in perhaps a structure that they want to use?
The structure is suggested in the actual task. I mean, what they shouldn't do in the 6 pages, the 6 pages are intended for data, for figures, things that might be easily forgotten, so that it's not a memory test. What the 6 pages shouldn't do is have the analysis and the evaluation developed in sort of prose that the student would then use and just copy out. So the 6 pages aren't there for the student to do the work in advance and then just copy out when they come into the controlled task. It really is just for data and things that you might easily forget.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, so the first task is the rationale. If a student asks you, what is a rationale, how would you respond?
It's what you're going to do or what you're going to use and why, and the evidence that suggests it's a good idea.
Okay, thank you. And in terms of what the students need to do, how would you describe that task?
So you have to try and get across what the business is trying to achieve through its marketing, how the research into the market, to the competition, how that's going to help it decide what it should do, and then how it should go about the marketing.
Okay. And do they include as part of the rationale, say, of the SWOT analysis, PESTLE, do they include it as part of that?
Yes, I mean, what the mark scheme suggests, if the last criterion, the one that's called justification, that's got this phrase, different analytical tools are used. And the analytical tools that are suggested in the Unit 2 spec are the SWOT and PESTLE. And students might have come across other analytical tools in Unit 1, for example. There's nothing to stop them using those. But yeah, the Unit 2 spec just mentions SWOT and PESTLE.
Right, okay, thank you. So in terms of the key essentials for that rationale, if they really need to maximise their marks, what would you say needs to go in there then?
I think they can follow the outline that's been set out in Part B. I mean, that's not going to change because the mark scheme is generic, so they need to talk about the marketing aims and objectives. There has to be some understanding of the research data on the market, so what are the trends, what's the competition, and then using those tools to justify the choices that have been made, referring to the data that you've got. So, I mean, the structure that's suggested in Part B, I would say, is a logical one to follow.
Right, okay. Ellen's got a really good point there regarding sort of accessing that research and information. You know, we're trying to, one of the great things about BTEC is trying to make links with industry and so on, but it's incredibly frustrating where you are contacting agencies and getting phone calls to try and get that information about a marketing campaign that they could release when it's either they're too busy or it's very, very difficult to get access to that material. How would you sort of advise how we can sort of get those contacts for the activities to get that research?
I mean, when you were teaching the old BTEC, the QCF, when you were teaching Unit 3, if you worked with a local business in the old Unit 3 on marketing and had links there, I mean, getting a marketing manager in to talk about, I mean, it won't be the same context that's in the Unit 2, but talk about the marketing that they have done so that you've got, if you like, a local example. So I think that's important. Getting a contextualized example, yes, it would be much more difficult. On the ice cream one, I think a lot of people have found that there are so many sort of artisan ice cream makers that they can look at their marketing campaigns just through secondary research by looking at what they've done through their website and through looking at local newspapers or researching local newspapers. But yes, I mean, getting an example in the context is going to be trickier, but having an example from a local business of their marketing I think is more straightforward, just with your normal industry contacts.
Okay, that's good advice. But one of the big issues is related to costings, because obviously what the students have to do as part of their marketing plan is to provide a realistic plan and also cost it. So how do we access that information when it's essentially sensitive data, as Deborah said?
I think a lot of that is going to be fairly generic, and it's not something that needs to be accessed while the students are researching. I mean, that's something that you can teach when you're teaching the unit. So finding out how much things cost to do in terms of hiring people's time, for example, for building a web page, or hiring people's time for a web campaign, or access to local newspapers or local radio. All of that's going to be fairly generic and can be done as part of the normal teaching for C3. And I'd suggest that sort of financial information should be on the 6 pages, so that the students can pick what they need to fit the context that they're going to be given and the budget that they're going to be given in Part B.
Okay.
There's a little thread there, Michelle and Colin, relating to Gantt charts and whether they're necessary as part of the submission. Would you know the answer to that one, Colin?
Well, necessary, no, because they're not mentioned in the criteria. But if they're used to illustrate and can be rewarded using the criteria, then they can be used.
Thank you.
I mean, none of the criteria say you've got to use those, no.
Thank you. Just a reminder, Michelle, we've got just under 10 minutes.
Okay. So we're looking at task B there, and what would you say is the best way to structure the marketing plan? Is there a formulaic approach? Is there things, essentials that students need to do?
I mean, I think taking their guide from the criteria again, so starting with a message that's linked to the objective, so that's linking to what you put in Part A, setting out a suitable marketing mix and showing how the elements might link together, suggesting appropriate media, perhaps considering benefits and drawbacks of the media, and linking that to the budget that you've sort of got the details on your 6 pages for. The timeline, it should reflect any sort of seasonal aspect. So, I mean, the ice cream one, there might be a seasonal aspect, so that needs to come through in your timeline. And then finishing off maybe with a discussion of how the success or otherwise of the campaign might be evaluated. So some sort of success criteria to show that you understand how it might be, I think things like number of sales or increased revenue or return on investment, but things that the student can show that they understand how you might judge the success of the campaign.
Okay, lovely, thank you. Okay, so just here, very quickly, can you confirm the date? So I want to ask 2 dates now. Can you confirm the date that the student exemplar material for Unit 2 is coming out? I think it will be the most wanted resource from Pearson to date. Is there a date there?
Third of April.
3rd of April.
Yeah.
Is this the student work where we're seeing a sample?
No. That's Part A.
All right. I'm sorry. I was asking two parts of this question really. One that we've got, which is the question I've given you before, and I do apologise if it's already there. But there was you provide student exemplar material in terms of student response. Is that on the web now, or is?
Yeah, that I mentioned that earlier. That we've got in at the moment, and we hope to have available for mid-February. The examiners are working on commentaries at the moment on the student work we've done. So yeah, the students we were using were taught Unit 2 before up until Christmas, and then they did the SAM, and then when we received that, our examiners have been collating them and writing commentaries. So we hope by mid-February.
Okay, and it's April with regards to the task A.
Yeah, the question that's on the screen there. Yeah, sorry, that's the 3rd of April.
Okay, 3rd of April. Okay, We've covered that one already. We know how many pages of research. Okay, so this is an interesting question. So if a student produces a marketing campaign for a business in a different market, so it's not the one on the brief, but it is a realistic plan, the costings are accurate and within an appropriate timescale, to what extent are they going to be penalised?
Well, we don't use the word penalised. Students aren't penalised; they're just rewarded for what they've produced.
Okay.
If it's not in context, then a fairly generic approach is going to struggle to get out of band 1 because they won't have answered the question.
Right. Right. Okay. Okay. So just moving on then, Colin, in terms of sort of exam excellence, and I'm going to come back to everybody's questions here in a moment. Will Pearson be providing, because we noticed, and I've been looking quite a lot at Unit 3, will they be providing some full mark responses, because there is a lack of those, you know, so you've got your 12 marker there. Well, what exactly does that look like?
I don't think we've got any other work that's come in, so the work that we've put up is all that we're going to be providing before the summer. Then we'll then have some more responses from the actual exam itself and be producing those in examiners' reports. But if you mean before the summer, no.
Okay. Thank you. And in terms of, say, for example, looking at Unit 3 again, and we're wanting students to apply to the context of the question and situation, will they get rewarded if they use real examples?
When you say real, you mean examples that aren't in the stimulus material of the question?
So if they're talking about different types of sort of savings accounts and they illustrate it with an example and go into a little bit more detail about a specific one there.
Yes, you'd be rewarded if it answered the question, but if the question was specifically related to a case study, then any example used has to be within the context of the case study.
Okay, so I have some further questions there. We have a question from Justina who wanted to ask about the new technical level 2 qualifications. I believe you mentioned to me, Colin, that those are sort of being discussed at the moment. Are they a replacement for the current level 2 or are they a different qualification?
They're both. For September 2017, we'll be running 2 level 2 qualifications for schools. The current one, the level 2 first, BTEC firsts, and the new Tech Awards. Eventually, the 2012 spec, the BTEC firsts, won't get onto the performance tables. We're confident they'll get onto the 2019. We haven't had confirmation of that yet, but we know that moving forward, level 2 qualifications for Key Stage 4 are going to have 40% external assessment. So that's why we're writing a new qualification. For post 16, the qualifications are already up. For post 16, it's the technical certificates.
Right. Okay. Thank you. And the question there, Deborah just wants a bit more clarification with regards to our Unit 2. Colin, are you saying that the 6 pages definitely do not have to be sent with the exam?
They have to be locked away by the teacher and kept in case they're called for.
Okay.
But they're not actually sent to the examiner. No.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And Kelly's there. One question. I think this will be our last question. Any news on the level 2 DFE list?
Well, no news other than we're expecting something by March, the end of March, but we don't know when.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Colin. We really, I think, did give you quite a hammering there. We do appreciate your time. So it's a massive thank you from all the people here in our cafe. To all the teachers out there, I do hope you found it useful. We are going to be providing some more BTEC Business cafes, and I think perhaps a Unit 2 one where we can share ideas and resources to support the Unit 2 would be ideal. Megan there, can I save the recording? Jim Riley is recording this for us as we speak. and this will be made available on the website, I think, and to the Facebook page. So thank you, everyone, and do have a big cup of coffee. I might go and have a glass of wine myself. Thanks again, Colin. Brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you, Colin.
Thank you. Okay.